countries often make mistakes like this. They often introduce tariffs, and it's mostly a way of punching themselves in the face and reducing their own opportunities, reducing the opportunities of their businesses to get access to inputs and materials that they need. The problem right now is that we have an intellectual trend of protectionism all around, and lots of countries think that they need to be self-sufficient. And in that case, we might see these waves of retaliatory tariffs.
My guest today is a man who just 2 years ago published a book, The Capitalist Manifesto, Why the Global Free Market Will Save the World. He is Swedish author and Cato Institute Senior Fellow, Johan Norberg. Johan, welcome.
Thank you.
2 years later, at the time of recording, there seems to be a great revolt against free markets, global free markets saving the world. What's gone wrong?
Yeah, it feels hopeless, doesn't it? But I think we should keep a couple of different things in mind. Yes, we're in a very problematic place right now when it comes to ideas, when it comes to intellectual trends, and we're going to have to do something about that. But let's not discount what's happened entirely. Let's not discount the contribution of free markets to saving the world, because, if we look at the world since the turn of the millennium, it has felt pretty bad. It's been quite awful, hasn't it? With the great financial crisis, the pandemic that shut down the world, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, geopolitical tensions, one crisis after another. And yet, these 25 awful years have also been the best years in human history, if you look at objective indicators of human living standards. Some 130,000 people were lifted out of extreme poverty every day for 25 years. Child mortality was roughly cut in half. So last year, 4 million fewer children died than in 2001. And if we measure human wealth by looking at GDP per capita, almost a third of all the wealth that the average person has ever attained was created over these 25 years. So this tells me that, trade and commerce have a way of adapting and improvising and innovating our way out of every problem that nature and governments throws at us. And that's why capitalism still works. It's just that people don't think so, and they're pushing back against it. And obviously, at some point, something is going to break, because we also need that intellectual openness to these ideas to keep it working.
The ideas have changed. People's appreciation have changed. Your comments about how things have gone the last 25 years would come for many people as a surprise. So there's a downside, or a perceived downside, particularly with free trade and globalisation. Can I just start with one? It's meant the hollowing out of industries in some countries, because comparative advantages meant that other countries can produce the same goods, often better and cheaper. Has there not been enough care for those who've been the losers, and there must have been losers somewhere, in global free market capitalism?
Oh, sure. Even though it's a win-win game, obviously, when you do new and improved things, and with better business models and better technologies, obviously, if you keep on doing the same things you've always been doing in the same way, you're bound to lose out. And then it's important to have flexible economies so that people keep on moving to the better and more productive jobs. And yes, sometimes we might not have done a good work at doing this, but the hollowing out of industry, the hollowing out of our economies, I don't buy that argument, because this is something that happens as economies evolve, as they become more productive. This has happened in every economy that has gotten rich. It started in Germany and Japan in the 1980s. It happened in South Korea in the 1990s, and in Singapore and so on. Right now, China is shedding industrial manufacturing jobs because they are becoming more productive, becoming more automated. So in a way, we can produce much more industrial goods than ever before, but we don't need as many people in those factories. So the idea of getting all those factory jobs back, that's a pipe dream. That's not going to happen. We might get some factories back, but mostly a few guys with computers rather than thousands of people wrenches and hammers and so on. And this is actually a good thing. This is how we increase our purchasing power, improve our innovative capacity so that we get better jobs and higher paying jobs, constantly upgrading, constantly moving on. So I think we should shed some of the nostalgia for past economics, because when you actually talk to people who worked in those factories, the kind of working conditions and the kind of wages that they had is something that we would not accept in an Amazon warehouse today. So even in that area, I think that free markets and free trade has delivered.
But there are people whom personally in their lives have lost out. It may be, indeed, I agree, I'm sure you're right, it's the inevitable cost, it's the creative destruction in which we actually, economies boom and grow. But there's a political issue, isn't there? Because if enough people think they're losing out, they'll try and elect people to get it back. And you'll get what you're seeing at present in much of the United States, a nostalgia for building things there by the use of tariff barriers. And here in Australia, our government also wants to make things here in Australia, the present government, and although they're not using tariffs per se, they're using restrictive practices nonetheless. So is there not a political issue, Johan, in that those who have lost out demand the return of what they had, and no one's properly educating or teaching us of the way forward?
Absolutely. We have to make sure that as we're becoming richer and creating better jobs with higher wages, that we also make sure that this is accessible for most people. So we have to have flexible economies. We have to help people to move to the new jobs and help with retraining. That is an important part of it for sure. But that's something that we do better when we have open economies with open trade, because what trade really is, it's like this magical machine into which you put what you are able to do, and at the other end of the machine you get the stuff that you want and that you need. So it's really a way of making our own labor as valuable as possible to get us as much of what we want as possible from our work. So if we introduce tariffs, if we block trade with other countries, it feels like it's safer, it feels like we protect something, but we don't. We only deny ourselves access to this machine. So we make our own work less valuable so that we get less in return for it, and we'll get fewer jobs. Change is going to happen whatever we do, because we do have technological change, customers change their preference, so we will have creative destruction of old industries, whatever we do. The only options we have is to decide, is this going to come from a position of strength where we're also creating new and better jobs and growing and expanding industries so that we can help people to get those jobs? Or will it come from a position of weakness and of stagnation, where those older industries are gone, but we have not used this machinery of trade to create more productive and better jobs? Well, in that case, we're in for a long period of stagnation, and I think we'll see much more complaints than we've seen so far.
So if the present tariff regimes do grow, both the United States and possibly reactive tariffs and then reactive tariffs, what's your forecast for the next decade or so?
I'm supposed to be a hopeless optimist, but I'm a little bit worried. Countries often make mistakes like this. They often introduce tariffs, and it's mostly a way of punching themselves in the face and reducing their own opportunities, reducing the opportunities of their businesses to get access to inputs and materials that they need. The problem right now is that we have an intellectual trend of protectionism all around, and lots of countries think that they need to be self-sufficient. And in that case, we might see these waves of retaliatory tariffs. In other words, countries standing looking at one another and taking turns at punching themselves in the face. Now, this could, in the worst case, end up in a 1930s scenario when America started with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, and we saw successive rounds of protectionism from most other countries. And world trade as a whole collapsed by some 2/3 in just a few years. And that ended with a terrible Great Depression, spread all around the world, mass unemployment, but also much worse international relationships between countries. Countries that used to benefit and know that they benefited from each other's hard work and trade and exchange suddenly began to see each other as enemies again. And this is absolutely one possibility when the intellectual climate is in the wrong place.
Let me give you some of the reasons I've heard why people want to reduce free trade. The first three comes out of the global pandemic of the early 20s, when the supply chains were disrupted and people thought we must make things at home because we can't rely upon global trade if the trading is closed down temporarily. And that led to a kind of a change of spirit, a change of expectation, that we need to make it here for security reasons, either wartime security or pandemic security. What do you make of that argument, Johan?
I think you're absolutely right. This is a major reason why we've seen this protectionist backlash. People got afraid during the pandemic, thinking it must be much safer to have shorter supply chains and most production back home. I think this is a terrible misreading of what actually happened during the pandemic. The major thing that happened during the pandemic was actually, as a friend of mine who's a bit of a prepper, who actually has his basement filled with canned food and fresh water, said the worst time in world history to be a prepper was in 2020 during the pandemic, because I thought that now at last people would see the benefit of what I've done. But he realized that in just a matter of days, almost everything was back on shelves. During the pandemic, entrepreneurs, businesses, they rebuilt supply chains in real time in a much better way than anyone expected. And interestingly, when we look at which countries and which businesses did this the best, because there were disruptions, obviously, well, it turns out that businesses and countries with international supply chains and a diverse and complex supply chain actually did better than those with a short supply chain. It sounds counterintuitive, but this is the reason why, the old saying doesn't go put all your eggs in one basket and protect it with tariffs and regulations. Because if you have a very short supply chain, only one supplier, for example, then it's enough that that particular supplier is under lockdown at that moment or facing a flood or a cyber attack or what have you, then it's game over. If you have a more diversified supply chain, you're used to looking at options, you've invested in more customer relationships, and they were able to rebuild and reroute and tweak manufacturing and supplies to actually get by in a much better shape. The most disasters afflict a particular region. It could be that it's a war, it's a natural disaster. It could be production facilities that just face technological constraints. And if we have then concentrated all the production to our vicinity, close by, then it's enough with that one problem. And then there will be a shortage of everything. It feels safe to have everything back home, but it's actually the worst thing that we can do. So we shouldn't, if we're worried about safety and secure supply chains, we shouldn't concentrate production and supply chains. We should diversify them so that we have as many options as possible.
Does this apply to military trade, if I use that language? There's been a lot of concern that people have outsourced their military supplies in a free market trade, which means I won't do it because the Americans can do it better, so I'll just let them do it for me. But suddenly people have realised that they need to rely upon themselves for military support because of all the political issues around, between the United States and NATO, where effectively the NATO countries outsourced their military defence to the United States. And America's saying, hang on, we don't think that's a good idea. Is America right? And were they wrong to outsource their military support on a free trade approach like that?
Well, here's actually an area where being a staunch free trader, I think there's a point here. You might not want your military to be dependent on a trade partner that might not always have your best interest at heart. Obviously, that goes if this is if you're dependent on an authoritarian government. It's also it goes if it's an unreliable partner like America under the present leadership. We in Europe have to suddenly think about how we can get out of a dependence on particular production from there. Yes, it makes sense to diversify there as well. But that does not mean producing everything back home. On the contrary, we've seen that in Europe for sure, that one of the problems when it comes to now rearming, which we've realized that we have to do, one of the bottlenecks is that we all have our national industries, our national standards, our national spare parts. It's difficult to get economies of scale. It's difficult to make it interoperable between the different armies and so on. So we really have to realize that, yes, we don't want to be completely dependent on any one single producer right now, but that goes even for a single national producer back home. We also need that economy of scale. We also need that ability to cooperate across borders if we want to be able to scale up rapidly and be.
Johan, that may work with 155 millimeter shells and tanks. Does it work also with, say, windmills or solar panels, where at the moment I think the Chinese have got a very large proportion of the worldwide trade in one producer? Is that unhealthy also? Or is that different from military hardware?
I think it's different. I think we should look at it with some caution. I think it makes sense to investigate and look at our supply chain so that we're not too overly dependent on any particular thing. But when it comes to things that are useful to us, but not necessarily something that comes with a lot of security implications, it might make sense to get it from the best place. Look, we're going to have to make up our mind. Either global warming is an existential issue and we're going to have to deal with it as quickly and at large a scale as possible, or we can think about all these sort of national champion arguments that we want our own green industries that thrive in this new economy. I don't think we can do both. If we can get get wind power, get solar cells cheaper and faster from elsewhere, we should do that. You know, if it rained solar cells during cloudy days and we could get access to it for free, should we stop using that because we want to protect our own industry there? Obviously not, because the real benefit does not come from the jobs that are being produced or from the businesses that are being created, but from the solar cells and from the environmental benefit that comes from it. And that goes not just whether it rains when it rains solar cells, but even when it comes from other economies, even if it comes from China, I think.
In fact, I've noticed that you've talked about goods and effectiveness of goods. So often the argument for reducing free trade talks about jobs, and as though the goal of a business was to create employment rather than produce goods for people to enjoy and use. They're almost like there's two different ways of looking at what the economy is about.
That's right, because I don't think that the point of the economy is to produce. It is to consume. This is what Adam Smith said in The Wealth of Nations, that what we're after is to get something that we couldn't get access to before. That's why we go to work in the morning. That's why we create these businesses. That's why we create jobs. And then it's if we can get something that we did with more people through automation, through higher productivity and better business models, we should do that. That does not mean that we will lose those jobs. It means that they will be move elsewhere instead, because then we also save money, we increase purchasing power when we do something more effectively. So we have all those resources, even more resources, to put that labor to better use elsewhere. You know, the old anecdote about Milton Friedman in China is supposedly he was looking at them digging a hole or building a motor highway or something like that using shovels. And he said, why don't you mechanize this? Why don't you just use big machines to get it done? And they said, no, this is a great way of creating employment for lots of people. And then he said, well, why don't you give them spoons instead to dig with? Because in that case, you'll put even more labor to work. And that's obviously true. If the goal of the economy is just to create jobs, that's a very easy thing to do. But those would be bad jobs at lower wages and worse working conditions. If we want progress, not just jobs, but also growth and more wealth so that we can solve more problems in the future, we have to make sure that we go from spoons to shovels to mechanized digging and then onwards to more and competitive and higher productive jobs.
I remember a statement by one of our great treasurers, from my point of view, of last century. He was a Labor Party man, actually, Paul Keating, who was after they'd reduced tariffs quite significantly, and he was asked, "What do you say, Mr. Keating, to those who lost their jobs because of your tariff reforms?" He said, "I'd ask them, how do you like your new jobs?" Same thing. Can I give you another objection? This is the Trumpian objection to tariffs. That is, everybody's ripping us off because the balance of trades aren't clear. This, I think, goes back to a kind of thinking which Adam Smith tried to dismiss, if I'm not mistaken, mercantilism. Can you explain firstly what that view of the world is and what's wrong with it?
Yeah, I think we're entering a new mercantilist era. It seems like some people think that Adam Smith only happened to other people. Mercantilism is the old idea that the world economy is really a zero-sum game. Trade is not mutually beneficial. It's good to export because then you get all that gold and silver or currency, whatever. It makes you feel powerful. But when you import, you'll see those things moving out again. You leave the gold, silver, and dollars to your trading partners. So you should subsidize your own exports, and if you're into trade, you should subsidize your export, but you should try to stop imports from other places. And obviously, that creates some international tension if everybody wants to export and no one wants to buy any stuff. The problem with this view is that the world is not a zero-sum game. If trade is a machine into which we put what we're good at producing and then we get what we need at the other side, we need both parts of it. We need to put something into it to get something out of it. It's not a loss to get something out of it, even though it seems like we're losing all those dollars and cents, because that's the real benefit of trade, to get something, some compensation for your work. I mean, hopefully we both love our work and that's why we do what we do. But the real reason why we have to go to work in the morning is to earn a wage so that we can go to the store and buy something. If to say that we want to export more and import less is really a way of saying we want to work more hours but get less from the store in exchange. And that doesn't make sense for a household, and it doesn't make sense for a nation. It's really a way of just reducing the specialization that really makes us rich, so that we're moving to the parts of the economy where we can create the most value. The problem with Donald Trump's approach is that he thinks that he only looks at the trade balance and he thinks it's a loss if America buys more than it produces. Well, you know, economists have looked at this since Adam Smith's days, and there's no relationship between the tariffs you have and the trade balance you have. The trade balance is all about how much you consume, how much you borrow, how much you save. And if America has 6% budget deficit, obviously they will have more consumption than they produce. That might be a problem. Their budget deficit and the size of government spending in the US, that's a problem. And they should do something about that. But that's not related to their tariffs with the rest of the world. So as Adam Smith, I think, put it, there's nothing more stupid in the trade theory than this absurd idea about trade balance.
My right, I heard someone saying one of the few truths of economics which has been proven is the law of comparative advantage, that in fact it's better for me, rather than doing everything myself, this is Adam Smith's point as well, rather than making all my clothes, building my house, making my car, doing my watch, it's better I do what I do, and others who are much better at doing it do what they do. That specialisation means we're both better off. We both do better. This is your point about trade not being a win-lose game, but done properly. It's a win-win game. That seems to be a truth that is being forgotten.
Yeah, that's right. It's because it's counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense if we just look at it. How could it be that you could benefit from trade even if you're better than others in producing everything or worse than others in producing everything? It doesn't make sense. But you know, we can see this in our individual relationships. Who's Australia's best actor, do you think?
Nicole Kidman.
So the question is, why doesn't Nicole Kidman sell car insurance? I think she would do a terrific job with her charismatic personality and her way of understanding psychology as well. I'm pretty sure that she would be able to convince anyone of buying car insurance or any kind of insurance from her rather than from others. So she's probably much better than most people who sell insurance right now in selling insurance. Well, why doesn't she? Well, because she might be twice as good as others when it comes to selling insurance, but she's probably 1 million times better at being an actress in big Hollywood productions. So it makes sense for Nicole Kidman to stop selling insurance and making her own clothes and making her own furniture and do what she does relatively best, being an actress. And then it makes sense for us who might not be as good as she would be at selling insurance to move into areas like that. Because even though I might be worse at doing everything in the world than Nicole Kidman is, but it benefits me from not trying to do a little bit of acting and a little bit of making my own clothes and selling insurance and move to the area where I'm relatively better in the relationship between me and Nicole Kidman. And that goes for businesses, for entire sectors, it goes for entire economies as well. We should all, if we're trying to maximize economic value, and obviously there are other aspects to it as well. But if that's what we're trying to do, create good, expanding sectors and businesses that create better, higher paying and higher productive jobs, it always makes sense for us to move to the areas where we are comparatively best. That's what comparative advantage is all about. And it's not just a theory. This is really what puts food on the table all around the world every day.
Can I take that point up and raise what I think is a moral concern about lack of free trade? Am I not right that when wealthy countries reduce their comparative advantage with poorer countries, they're effectively taking the money from the poorer countries? That is, I protect my agriculture, which means many people in Africa or elsewhere can't sell their goods to my country, and they're worse off. I'm paying more in my country for my agricultural goods. I probably can afford that, but you're not helping the other countries in the world. And that, a view of a moral concern for the world surely would be one that would encourage free trade for that very reason, to lift others out of poverty.
You would think so. If we care about global justice in some form and global development and poverty reduction, we'd better realize that poorer countries with less access to capital and education, they do have very powerful comparative advantages in labor-intensive jobs, especially when it comes to agriculture and when it comes to very labor-intensive manufacturing, clothes, apparel, for example. But these are the particular areas that for some reason rich countries have decided that no, we want a production there, even though we're less efficient, even though it's not profitable, even though it's not what our consumers in our countries see in high demand. So we subsidize and we protect jobs and industries over there, which is really a way of it's a kind of reverse Robin Hood, where we're taking opportunities and wealth from the world's poor and handing it to the least productive and least successful parts of, but rich parts of our economies. And this is how we keep certain large parts of our world in poverty. We should better realize that once upon a time we got rich in rich countries through jobs and businesses like that, and we should give the rest of the world the same chance.
I've often wondered what is it about agriculture in particular that it's the one area where there's some sort of cultural issue. You look at Europe, they want to keep their farms. I know America, Australia's different. We actually not protect our agriculture. We're out there, out there. But there's something about agriculture that's got remarkable cultural power to maintain specialist positions. Do you understand what's going on? I've never quite got it. Is there some idealisation of the farm, or why is America?
I think it is some sort of deferred nostalgia for a past that we seem to have forgotten about, and yet we urban modern citizens have some sort of bad conscience for having left the farms, left rural areas once upon a time, and we now it's partly for aesthetic, partly for moral reason. We think that it has to be supported. Then, as a farming, agricultural, rural leader in Sweden in the late 19th century, said that if we consider this the mother of all trades, can it really be the mother of it all if it cannot even sustain itself? Shouldn't it be sort of proud and self-reliant rather than relying on handouts, welfare handouts from the government? I think, but there's something to it like that. But it's also just pure optics in a way. For some strange reason, the smaller your agricultural sector is, the more handouts it gets. At least that's the general overall relationship. And I think that's because if only 1% of your population work there, you can see the benefits of subsidies and tariffs concentrated in time and place. Whereas the costs of those subsidies to consumers, to taxpayers, and to the poor of the world, that's dispersed in time and place, and it's very difficult to organize those interests. Whereas it's very easy to organize the interests of the few in that sector, so they have a louder voice often in debates over trade and the economy.
Johan, we're going to have to draw our conversation to a close, and I want to end on this. What will it take, do you think, to rediscover free trade? Will we need to go through another period of quasi-depression for new scholars to rise up and say, listen, you've got this entirely wrong. Adam Smith proved mercantilism was wrong back there in the 18th century. Why on earth are you killing yourselves today, damaging yourself today? So are we in for a long period of down before we get up again?
Yeah, this is... there is a risk that we're going there. The worst thing and the best thing about protectionist, populist ideas is that they don't work. So the moment we start to impose tariffs and start trade wars like this, all those promises, all those ideas that this would make our economy strong and create jobs will be replaced with a sad reality of decay, of a lack of growth and a loss of jobs. Inputs for our industries will be more expensive. It'll be harder for them to compete. So, the reading of the past Trump tariffs during his first period seemed to show that roughly for every job that was protected, some 10 jobs were lost in other industries, partly because of a higher cost of inputs, but also because of a lack of loss of purchasing power that could be used for other industries. I think when that starts to happen at a large scale, I think there will be quickly disappointment. I think the opinion will turn around, and once again, we'll see the benefits of free trade. But let's hope that we don't have to go all the way there, right? This is why we're doing what we're doing, to try to sort of get to the intellectual conclusion before we end up in that terrible, sad economic mess that will lead everybody to reach that conclusion. Let's help that along by explaining what goes wrong when we have these tariffs in place, when we start trade wars like this. We can explain, we can talk about this. This is really why we're into the ideas trade, right? So as to put a big sign by the abyss and say, don't go there because the consequences will be terrible. Hopefully, then, if we do our work right, people won't jump because even though it'll certainly teach them that protectionism was bad, um, that's not where we want to end up.